And once again, I'd like to welcome you all to Alumni Day. It is always wonderful to see so many Princetonians back on this campus. This morning, I have the honor to introduce this year's recipient of the James Madison Medal. This award is bestowed upon a graduate school alum who has led a distinguished career, advanced the cause of graduate education, or achieved an outstanding record in public service. David Cart of the graduate class of 1983 is this year's James Madison Medalist. David is a Nobel Prize-winning economist whose groundbreaking research methods and brilliant scholarship has redefined our understanding of labor economics. He has spent his career studying immigration, wages, education, and gender and race-related differences in the labor market to advance our understanding of important policy issues. Beyond this research, he has devoted much of his life to sharing his passion for economics with his students. Currently an emeritus professor of economics at the University of California-Berkeley, David has also held teaching positions at the University of Chicago, Columbia, Harvard, and of course, right here at Princeton. As an undergraduate student at Queen's University in Canada, he showed great promise early on. His undergraduate thesis advisor, Michael Abbott, said that David's genius was his ability to develop experimental techniques in economics that mimic the randomized trials conducted in medicine. David developed a strong work ethic, which he credits to being raised on his family's dairy farm in Ontario. Though he chose not to pursue the family business, he once said, "If you're familiar with working on a dairy farm, then all other jobs seem quite good." Indeed, we're glad that David found economics, which I also understand was by accident. While pursuing his undergraduate degree in physics, David stumbled upon his then-girlfriend's economics textbook. Intrigued, he began taking courses in economics, and as they say, the rest is history. While at Queen's University, David's interest in labor economics and income inequality quickly grew, leading David to Princeton, where he earned his Ph.D. in economics and taught from 1983 to 1996. At Princeton, he mentored and advised scores of students, and I know that we're all grateful that David spent a good part of his career here training our students. His accolades are too numerous to list them all, but they include the John Bates Clark Medal, the Frisch Medal, and the Jacob Mincer Award. His distinguished career and influence was recognized with a share of the 2021 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. He was honored for his empirical contributions to labor economics, his use of hard data and rigorous statistical analysis to uncover a greater understanding of the labor market. A groundbreaking and revolutionary economist, it is my distinct pleasure this morning to introduce Nobel Prize winner and the 2025 Madison Medalist, David Cart of the graduate class of 1983.
Thank you very much. Very, very nice to have everybody here this morning on such a chilly morning. I thought I'd start off the Alumni Day events with an economics lecture. I'm sure everybody's ready for that. I'm going to start off with a little quiz. Some of you may know some of these names. Michael Blumenthal was, among other things, the Secretary of the Treasury. William Bowen probably goes without saying who he was. Jim Heckman was a Nobel Prize winner about 10 years ago, a distinguished professor at Chicago, and me. The connection between all of us is that the four of us were four of the six Madison Medal winners in economics. By the way, economics is tied for first in the fields that have won the Madison Medal with physics, so I think we're doing pretty good. We did our work in a part of the economics department called the industrial relations section. which is kind of an obscure, at that time was kind of an obscure corner of Firestone Library. Over here, right there. Everybody remembers the first time they went in Firestone Library and somebody said, well, it's on, C floor. This was on A floor down here on the back corner of Firestone. And you may have remembered when you walked around Firestone Library and you went down A floor, there was, especially some of us who are a little bit older, will remember there was a series of kind of black and white pictures down the hallway, and this is one of them. They were commissioned when the Industrial Relations section had its 50th anniversary in the 1940s. And there's another interesting connection. Three of us all had the same advisor, or one of our co-advisors, which was Professor Richard Quant, who is still with us today, and he was in the class of 1952, very similar to the class of John Nash and Gary Becker, who were Nobel Prize winners in economics as well. So what was the secret of this IR section, this part of the economics department? Well, it was founded in 1922 with a gift from John Rockefeller, another very famous Princeton connection. And the idea at that time was to try and study how workers and companies were interacting. This was coming after some pretty serious problems in some of Mr. Rockefeller's companies in the 20s. And as some of you may know. The director for many, many years was a man named J. Douglas Brown, who in the 1930s moved to Washington and helped establish Social Security. And he considered that his greatest accomplishment, although he had many other accomplishments, including being dean of the faculty of the university for many years. In 1955, this job was taken over by a professor named Fred Harbison. Now, interestingly, Fred was a student of Doug Brown's, so he was kind of following this lineage. He had moved to Chicago for a number of years and then came back, and he was very interested in the topics of in the 1940s. Of course, there was a big spread of unions all through the U.S. economy after a change in the law. And he was very interested in this new type of industrial relations that was developing. And he also got very interested in the burgeoning field of development economics and had a big role in the early years of that field, which is now, of course, one of the most important fields. In the 1968, he retired from that position, and Albert Rees came. Now, I didn't really know Doug Brown or Fred Harbison at all, but I knew Al Rees pretty well because he was around Princeton when I was here, although he had been director just a few years. But he brought something new, which has been a lasting legacy to the study of labor economics at Princeton. He was very interested in two sort of new topics for a labor economist to talk about. One of them was kind of how welfare programs worked, and he was involved very heavily in the early negative income tax experiment that was done in New Jersey in the 1960s. And he was also extremely interested in the topic of discrimination. Economists started studying discrimination in the 1950s, but he brought that interest to Princeton. And among the students that he inspired, actually wrote his thesis under Al on the topic kind of combining these interests of trade unionism and discrimination, was Orley Ashenfelter, who eventually became my thesis advisor and directed the IR section for a very long time. Orley just lives across the street here, but couldn't be here. So he brought in a very large number of sort of modernization changes to the field of economics, really centered at Princeton, and that started kind of a major revolution in the way the field has done. But you can see, Orley was a student of Al's, Fred was a student of Doug Brown's, and there was really a continuity here of the importance of this sort of legacy coming at Princeton. Now, what was the Princeton School? Now, it's a little hard for me to say firsthand what the Princeton School was like in the 50s and 60s. I knew Bill Bowen pretty well and helped him in some of his research early on, and I got a sense that some of these same ideas were important even when he did his thesis in the 50s. So let's assume this was true. By the time I got here, I think the Princeton School of Labor Economics had a bunch of tenets. One was that we were supposed to focus on people. And if you studied economics, probably most people who took a first-year economics class, that was almost the last thing they talked about. So that was kind of unusual. Another thing was that we were supposed to respect institutions like unions and governments and the way that firms actually worked. So we were supposed to sort of have a more realistic idea about how things operated. The third thing was, and this was pretty innovative at the time, we were supposed to be sort of up to date in our statistical methods, and I would credit that with Richard Quant, who was very innovative professor of econometrics for many years, and as I mentioned, had been the advisor of quite a number of well-known people. A fourth thing, and this I think is very true even today, the IR section continues and is still very prominent in the economics department, is the importance of trying to guide the next generation, not just the PhD students, which is of course a very important part of the mandate, but also undergraduates. So many well-known people who've gotten an undergraduate degree at Princeton have done a JP or a senior thesis under somebody at the IR section, including Orley, for instance. And then finally, and I guess probably our lasting legacy at Princeton, was this idea of taking evidence seriously. And just to sort of illustrate this, there's actually a history of science people working on the history of how economics got changed by people at Princeton. And one of the people who's been working on this is a Brazilian economist named Arthur Neto. And he took all of Orley's papers from 1979 and ran them through an AI program to analyze the words. And these are the words that come out. It's kind of interesting. You can see, table, which of course, if you look at a labor economics paper, it's just full of tables of numbers. You can see results, and you can see data. You can also see workers, union, unemployment, earnings, training, all those kind of substantive things. So this was really kind of very obvious, even as early as 1979, how this was going to affect things. So just to illustrate what kind of things were going on in Princeton in the 80s and 90s when I was here, and some of you were probably exposed to this, Orley wrote a very famous paper, which turned out to be extremely influential in our field, basically saying that in the case of evaluating training programs, we really needed to start to do randomized trials, to do things exactly like they do in medicine. And this has eventually become really the standard in many fields in economics, especially in the development economics field. And that spread, I would say, from Princeton through some of our students and on to the rest of the profession. We're also well known for what you might think of as natural experiments. These are situations where we're trying to study things that happen that are kind of unexpected and that probably could be argued occurred for reasons other than the underlying economics. In the late 1980s, I had an undergraduate I worked with named Konstantin Alexandrakis, class of '89, and Konstantin was from Miami. And he told me about the Miami boat lift and how that had affected the Miami labor market. And I went on to write, at that time, a very modest paper. Of course, the reason why Scarface is here is because Scarface, the opening of that movie, is all about the Mariel boat lift. And this paper was really one of the very first and still used a little bit to try and illustrate this idea of a natural experiment when you're teaching economics these days. So thanks to Konstantin, I think probably that's one half of my Nobel Prize. Another example of this, I think it was, many of you probably have heard of this paper, and it's very much in the Princeton tradition because Alan Kruger at the time was a professor along with me here. We got the idea of trying to study a minimum wage increase that was going to occur in New Jersey, or at least it could have occurred in New Jersey. And so we wrote this paper, and that's probably the other half of my Nobel Prize right there. And this is a picture of Alan and I when we were much younger. And you can see that we had just won another prize, and the photographer was very interested in the fact that we were economists. And so he made us take out our wallets. Anyway, it was quite a good picture, I think, actually, one of my better ones. I would say a legacy of that period is in the people that we had. We had many great PhD students in the 80s and 90s. I'm just going to mention a few of them that some of you may know or have actually taken a class from. Ann Case was in the Woodrow Wilson School for many years, recently retired. Janet Curry has been here on the faculty for a number of years. Unfortunately, is moving to Yale, but has been an important force here. Josh Angrist was one of our students. He went on to MIT where he co-won the Nobel Prize with me for his work on this same area, and he was another student of Orly and me. And David Lee was one of the last students I had as a Ph.D. on the faculty here, and David was the provost here for a while. And these are all labor economists, or at least I would call them labor economists, who are active in the field. We also had many undergraduates, and some of you may know some of these people. Constantine I've already mentioned. Doug Harrington wrote one of the best undergraduate theses I'd ever supervised. Unfortunately, Doug decided to go into business and now is second in command at Amazon, so it worked out for him. Leslie Perlow wrote a great undergrad thesis using data she got from the undergrad student office and is now a professor at Harvard. John Lenkemeyer is done well in business. He wrote another great undergrad thesis. And John Gurian wrote a great JP under me. He didn't do his thesis under me, but he went on and now is a professor at Northwestern. So these were just a handful of the many great students that we had in both the undergrad and grad years, and I'm sorry that I didn't have enough space to put more pictures on because I had quite a few others that I could. And luckily, I can still remember most of their theses. So if you see me and you want to talk about your thesis, I'll be glad to do that. I will mention one time I was on campus back in the day when the Princeton undergrad theses were still in Firestone, and George Shultz came in with a bunch of Secret Service agents, and they went down and pulled his thesis off the shelf. And I could see that this was one of George's most proud moments, and I realized that the senior thesis is really one of the defining things about Princeton, and I think we should all be grateful for it. I'm sure all of you had a great experience doing that, and hopefully you many of you had a great experience doing that. And I think that those of us who were on the other side advising got to know many, many very important people who've gone on to success and learned something from that exchange on our side as well. So I think the lasting lesson of this Princeton School was really two things. First, a great institution with great support and the right people can make a big difference. And secondly, that can be true even in economics where progress is slow. So thank you very much and have a good day here.
We now have time for a few questions. If you do have a question, I ask for you to raise your hand, and please wait for a mic before asking your question.
So glad everyone got to witness that. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
What are some of the most interesting questions that labor economists are working on now? What are the kinds of problems that you want to analyze comparable to the minimum wage thing?
This doesn't work? They just had to turn it on. One of the really interesting questions has to do with immigration. That, as you know, is a very controversial topic, but in many countries around the world, it's also very important because many countries, including the United States, are in an era of a probably stable or declining population. And so people are going to start thinking about immigration as a part of a package of addressing that even more than they are today. Another topic that's really interesting, this may sound kind of strange if you're not an academic. Academics are unusual in that we don't have somebody telling us what to do, but everybody else in the world does. And so we've recently started to study what do bosses do? And how do they influence careers and shape the way teams work inside companies? And we're a data-driven field, labor economics, and the data has become available now to study people as they move between companies and also how they move within companies, because we've got access to massive data sets in many countries, the entire population of workers, including who you work with and who, in some cases, who your bosses are. Another topic or set of topics that's very important has to do with the role of responsibilities on the family side and how they affect people's behavior in the labor market. So the interaction between demands on the family side and features on the how people succeed in their careers. And again, there's a lot of these natural experiments and sometimes even randomized trials where people are experimenting with different kinds of funding programs for taking care of children or partial programs of providing daycare at work and things like that. So those are a few of the examples I can think of.
There's a question over here.
What do you see as the likely effects and also methods of studying such effects of impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data-driven interactions really between individuals and their employers and the market and so on?
That's well, I knew somebody was going to ask that question. It seems like the machine learning thing has been with us for a number of years. People are familiar with that kind of technique. You know, when you're typing on Word or on your cell phone and it autocorrects, that's a version of a simple algorithm of that type. I think that has been more easy to integrate, the basic machine learning things, and have probably influenced the ways that people try to develop statistical models for decision making. For instance, in large companies where, for instance, somebody has to have a website which is doing commerce, for example, you can't really have people answering the phone. That was the way we used to do it. You know, when a long time ago, when you went to Sears and ordered something, you know, there was a person wrote it down, and then it came to, so that's all now handled by complicated algorithms, and the algorithms are all fine-tuned and developed by a combination of machine learning methods and more traditional statistical methods. The impact of the broader types of large language model AI that everybody's talking about now, I think is a little less clear how that's going to evolve. It seems like it's had a huge effect already in some areas. Most relevant that I know about is it's really reduced the demand for computer science graduates. So if you have a 11th grade kid and you're thinking about what should they go in, I'd be careful about computer science. Because they've using LLM-based coding tools, they've been able to improve the efficiency of the software development engineers enormously. And so that's going to really change those kind of tasks. Now, how much it's going to influence other kinds of tasks is very unclear. Some of the consulting I do in business, we're analyzing that, trying to see how that affects things. There's a couple of very interesting studies by labor economists of different settings where it improves the productivity of one group more than another group. And when that happens, that's very disruptive to the labor market because then employers start hiring less of one kind of worker and more of another. Historically, in the past, new technologies tended to be biased in a way that they were making highly skilled workers more productive and less skilled workers less important, and so all the less skilled workers lost their jobs. So that probably is a vague understanding of what happened in the internet revolution or what happened with the steam generation or the electrification. All of those things were kind of like that. AI may be a little different. The initial victims of AI seem to be more highly skilled workers, but it seems like it's going to be extremely disruptive for many sectors, and we're in an era of a lot of disruptions going on. And it's the disruptions at the high end are probably quite disturbing for those of us who are providing PhD training, because we don't quite know exactly what's going to happen. Not only have we got a lot of problems with the funding issues coming up, but now exactly what's going to happen with the AI thing. That what exactly should we be doing in terms of investing and which kinds of learning for PhD students is very interesting.
Question in the back
here. Thank you, Professor, and congratulations. I was wondering how you, your colleagues, and students you supervise have navigated the nexus of academia and research with applications to policy and practice. As a doctoral student who's taking classes in economics, and I focus on education, a lot of the work that you and your colleagues have done are what I've read in my intro classes and even now as a graduate student. But how do you navigate that connection from the research you do to what happens in policy and practice? Thank you.
It's people often ask me that. I am not somebody who's ever had a role in government. For most of my life, I was actually not a U.S. citizen, most of my life in the U.S., and so I couldn't really be involved in the government too much. But also, I don't think it's really my relative strength, to tell you the truth. I had many colleagues. Alan Kruger, his picture was up here, was very involved, was in the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, very active in that dimension. And many other people that I've advised have had roles like that, not as prominent as Alan in many cases, but, and they, I think, are bringing with them some of the insights from the academic side and trying to say, well, this is what we know or think we know about the science underlying different issues. But policy world is different than that. The science is one thing, but there's a lot of other things going on. So if you take issues that I've worked on, like minimum wages or immigration, I would argue the science findings in the immigration literature have almost nothing to do with immigration policy. Maybe in the minimum wage side, it's been more effective. In education side, probably there's been some impact of the science. That things have really changed a lot in that area with the understanding of how teachers and students interact and how different types of settings affect different kinds of students. I think we were at the cusp of going further in that direction. Now, whether we will be able to going forward, I don't know, but I think that had been a promising area before for science. And eventually the science has some impact on the policy in some areas, but a lot of times the policy thing is driven by things that economists don't really study very much. And some other sciences, social sciences study, sociology and psychology and anthropology even, maybe are relevant for some of the issues that are more policy side. But the economic science things, I think, are a part of the story, but I don't have particular experience in that other than telling my friends what to do. And as you know, that doesn't always work.
Here you go.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for sure. I was just curious, your study for New Jersey fast food, it looked to me quickly, was about a 19% increase on what's clearly a huge chunk of the relatively low-paid labor force in a state as densely populated as New Jersey with high costs. Broadly speaking, what did it suggest would happen as a consequence?
Well, that study was, one of the very first studies where somebody had the micro data at the individual store level. Alan and I had gone out and collected it, and it suggested that there would be very, very little change in employment, but an increase in prices. And I probably, if that was the only study like that, that would be, you'd have to think about that very cautiously. It turns out, luckily for Alan and I, many, many studies have been done since then. Much higher quality studies, in all honesty, with much better data administrative data in some cases studying, for instance, the introduction of a minimum wage in Germany for the entire country, using data on every firm in the entire country and every worker. And so those kind of studies have all basically found the same thing. So luckily for Alan and I, it turned out we got it right the first time. But you can't really guarantee that with a kind of a small-scale study like we did. But I think we were influential, not so much, maybe partially because the findings were controversial, but more importantly for the idea of doing that kind of a study. That was really our thing.
Excellent. Thank you for that, David. And I ask you all to join me once again in a round of applause for David Cart, this year's Madison Medalist.